Hello everyone and welcome to this webinar about the introduction of the new Trans-Tasman method of measurement, the Australian and New Zealand Standard Method of Measurement 2018, or ANZ SMM 2018 for short. My name is Marilyn Moffat and I'm the Executive Director of NZIQS, and I will be presenting an introduction to why we have moved from NZS 4202 to the new method of measurement. Alongside me is Paul Bunkle, who is a life member, registered quantity surveyor, past president of NZIQS and a former director of Rawlinson's. Paul has been involved in industry group that looked at the options for the method of measuring in New Zealand, technical review and producing the guidance, and now these workshops and webinars. Later on, Jonathan Modrovic, the product specialist at Exactor, will demonstrate how ANZ SMM has been built into the Caustics phraseology and how you can use it. Exactor are a platinum partner of NZIQS, and we'd like to thank them for their support so that we can put on this webinar and the workshops that we have been running around the country. We've had over 500 people register for the workshops that we've held in March and April, and we're very keen to get the word out there amongst everyone in the industry. I'd also like to mention our thanks to Alan Muxlow, who's put in very many hours in reviewing this new method of measurement and producing the guide material. So what is the Australian and New Zealand Standard Method of Measurement 2018? This standard method of measurement is a joint Australia and New Zealand industry guideline. It's based on the Australian Standard Method of Measurement of Building Works, the 6th edition, with some changes for New Zealand conditions and practice. This new method of measurement is jointly owned and managed by the Australian Institute of Quantity Surveyors, NZIQS, and the Master Builders Australia and Registered Master Builders Association in New Zealand. Its introduction has also been supported by the New Zealand Institute of Building and the Specialist Trade Contractors Federation. Australia will be introducing this new edition in a few months. There's relatively little change for their members, as the changes are mostly for New Zealand conditions. This is not NZS 4202, it is a new method of measurement, and we're asking the industry to see it as such. Why was this method of measurement chosen? An industry steering group met to consider the options for a method of measurement in New Zealand, and they considered 4 options. Leaving NZS 4202 as it was, that wasn't an option, as New Zealand standards required that all of their standards be brought up to date. 4202 is 23 years old. It is the oldest standard on their books. Looked at updating 4202. That was going to be at a considerable cost and time to NZIQS and the industry. Considered adopting an international standard, and the UK new rules of measurement and the Australian standard method of measurement were looked at and reviewed, or whether we should develop an entirely new standard. The steering group had broad representation from the industry, including NZIQS, Registered Master Builders Association, New Zealand Institute of Building, Specialist Trade Contractors Federation, professional QS firms and contractors. After evaluating all these options, they recommended adopting and adapting the Australian standard method of measurement. The benefits of the existing standard method of measurement far outweighed the cost, time and voluntary technical input that it would have been required to update 4202. Standards New Zealand have been kept informed throughout this process, and after this new method of measurement has had a reasonable opportunity to be used in New Zealand, they will advertise their intention to withdraw 4202, and at that stage anyone can make submissions for or against that. The key benefits of this joint Trans-Tasman standard are that it's seen as a much clearer document with less opportunity for grey areas. It gives contractors more certainty of what they are pricing and will work well in the New Zealand industry. It is very similar to other international standard method measurements, including the UK new rules of measurement and other measurements around the world. A common method of measurement will make it easier for New Zealand and Australian companies to complete work across the Tasman. The landscape tabulated format of this method of measurement is easy to follow and is used internationally. This is an industry-led guideline, and that gives us greater opportunities for more frequent updates at a lower cost to the industry. Future reviews will be done by the Australian and New Zealand Institute of Quantity Surveyors and the respective master builders. It's also hoped that this will mean more schedules of quantities are produced. This is something NZIQS has been promoting as better for the industry. So when to start using this new method? Well, we would like you to start using this new standard method of measurement for measuring now. You'll note in section 2 preliminaries there is a note that states that this is measured in accordance with the Australian and New Zealand standard method of measurement, and you can use this in your preambles. We know that there are companies planning to use this new method of measurements for projects coming up, and we'd like you to keep in touch if you're using this. There isn't a set date for doing it. We appreciate it will take time for companies to switch over. As I said, we've had over 500 people at the workshops we've had around the country, and we need to spread the word about the new method to everyone in the industry. If you want to find out more information, go to our webpage, which is nziqs.co.nz, and on the home page you can see circled there is a link to a web page that has more information and how to purchase ANZ SMM. We've also had advertising and editorial content in Build Magazine, Building Today, and the Builders and Contractors magazines. On the web page on our website, you can find a number of information to help you with using the new standard method of measurement, including New Zealand guidance notes and the ductwork diagrams from 4202 that were considered useful. There's instructions for how to use the tabulated rules, a comparison section by section with 4202, a frequently answered question sheet, and also information on how you can buy the new guide online. This is $40 for NZIQS members and $50 for others. If you do have feedback or questions about this introduction, you can contact me on email. You'll also find my contact details on our website. I'm now going to pass you on to Paul Bunkle, who's going to guide you through how to use ANZ SMM.
The first thing that you'll notice immediately is that you have to turn the standard on its side with the spine upwards to read it. That's because of the tabulated format of the document. On page Roman numerals 2, you'll notice that the standard has already had 6 plus 1 editions in Australia before this first joint country edition. A hardy bunch of souls acknowledged on page Roman numerals 3, chaired by me, have instigated a large number of changes to the Australian style document to allow it to more comfortably be used in New Zealand. Australia agreed to our recommendations, and this joint standard is the result. It isn't exactly similar to NZS 4202, but that was the point of the exercise. Revision was needed to NZS 4202 to continue in our ever-modernising marketplace to cover changes in work styles, materials, and government standards and acts of parliament, etc. The Joint Industry Committee felt that this guide, modified as best we could achieve, would meet our members' needs. The people acknowledged on page Roman numerals 3 from industry, from education, and are the sort of people we needed to look into the standard. Their feedback has been absolutely amazing and very positive. I'd like to thank them all for their contribution. A table of contents follows in the standard from pages 1 to 3 as a guide to locating trade sections. You flip that over. Next page. And this is setting a standard for the trade summary sheets for tender documents. Note the included sums section is at the end of the summary to encourage users to position provisional and contingency sums where they should be and have margins applied appropriately. Next, I'll move on to the introduction, general rules and recommendations, which are found on your page 1 of your guide. Page 4 of your guide. And you'll notice at this point the numbers shift to the inside spine and they continue in that position for the rest of the guide, so just be aware of that. If we look at section 1, introduction, item 1.3, I'd just like to note that this really sets the standard for this guide. 1.3 says to consider it being necessary to add additional information to anything to make it easier for tenderers to understand what you're writing. This is really where we're going with this guide. 1.5, I don't think it's ever occurred in my career, but it'd be nice to have 7 clear working days to get documents before we have a schedule of quantities delivered to tenderers would be nice. But this again is just trying to emphasize that we're after good documentation before we complete our schedules of quantities. And of course, item 1.6, guidance notes, is something that will have fallen out of the inside of your, or the front cover of your new method of measurement when you received it. These are the guidance notes that have been put together to assist with the changes that we made to make this standard more appropriate for New Zealand, and I'll go through those shortly. Moving on to section 2, bills/schedules of quantities. 2.5, users will note that some new trade sections have been included in the standard. Without doubt, as time moves on, others will come of age also. Some trades previously separate are now joined, and this is how the market is developing. I refer also to this in the section to facades package and the plastering and painting sub-trades joining hands for quality reasons and logistics reasons. You'll notice in the guide when you open it a bit later on that DPC is found under a section called paper and plastic membranes immediately after the concrete section. This is just the way the Australians have got it. All the normal rules as to how we would measure DPC are there. It's just in a separate section, but easy to find. Section 4, description, items 4.5 to 4.7. It's important that we consider repeating this in your preambles, wherever it is considered worth reminding tenderers of their obligations. So just take note of the way it's worded and maybe change it to be appropriate to how you like it, and then carry on. Section 6, billing units. We're used to most of the billing units that we have, but one thing that has changed is that the reference to tonnes we've left in the guide because that's how Australians measure it. We use kilograms, and we've put this in our guidance notes to assist you. Section 12, which is reference to the order of the guide and the trade summary. 12.1, I'm not sure if it's worth changing it. The basis of this document is in fact NatSpec, which is an Australian specification system. We have MasterSpec here in New Zealand. You may wish to change to the order of MasterSpec, which is similar to NatSpec, but I would suggest sticking with the way the guide is set out. It'll make it easier for tenderers to follow. Section 15, the tabulated rules. Read through section 15 for yourselves. I'm just turning to it myself to have a look at it. It's a good guide as to how to use this document, but in fact Alan Muxlow has written a very good guide which we've put on the Institute's website, which is a little easier to follow, and I'll just run through that with you or read it over so that as you listen to me you'll probably pick up how this works pretty easily. So starting at the beginning, it's called ANZ SMM Guidance on the Tabulated Rules Format. This brief guidance note is to help understand ANZ SMM by knowing what information the different columns contain, how they interact, how to read and interpret them, and what to expect in each column. Reference to and understanding Section 1, the Introduction, General Rules and Recommendations, is necessary to set the scene about the basic measurement principles that are applied in this document. Also, specific reference in this section to Clause 17, symbols and abbreviations, is essential to be able to distinguish the difference between symbols used, especially greater than and equal to and greater than, and less than and equal to and less than. In viewing the introduction to each section or trade in the ANZ SMM, there are 4 columns as follows: the information to be included, the measurement rules, the measurement prices, and the definitions. Looking at these 4 separately, firstly, the information to be included, column 1. It identifies the standard items included at the start of each trade or section. It also notes items that have a unique project cost, for example, tests, preparation of shop drawings, samples, etc., all of which will be in the trade section specification when relevant to the project. What you'll see happening here is we're measuring preambles. This is the area where all of those standard items that you've previously had, or those you need to put in from your specification, are written and put in with a, we'll get to measurement prices, but it is the where you'll put an item next to those. The next one we move on to is the measurement rules, column 2. And this sets out the overall introductory measurement principles and rules that apply throughout, identifying the items that are to be measured for the trade section. As you read down this list, you can quickly identify the requirements with words like measure, state, include, describe, that set the form, the range, and the pattern of the items to be included. Each rule has a designated number starting with M.1. Next column, column 3, is measurement and prices. It is an elaboration of the rules that identifies items that are deemed to be included in the contractor's price. Designed to present a picture to the estimator of the all-inclusiveness nature of the schedule items or incidental work that is deemed to be included in the appropriate item in the schedule, whether mentioned in the item description or not. This is often a single clause numbered P1 point, 2 point, etc., but occasionally further separate numbered items add clarification or deemed to be included explanations of more situations. The last column, column 4, is definitions, and it's just that. In case there is any doubt or ambiguity, a further explanation of terms that have bold lettering in any of the columns. Such definitions more often elaborates, expands, and more fully explains the content or expectations of the word, and again are numbered, this time starting with D.1. Classification tables is the next section as we go down. This section of ANZ SMM covers classification tables incorporating 3 columns previously explained. For this brief explanation, the additional new columns have been numbered and given a title to help with the explanation as follows. Now, this is where we're starting to measure our items that are to be priced, that are picking up our full measure of the trade section. So column 1, items, identifies the first level of various parts or items that occur in each trade section and are the descriptive feature commonly encountered in building works. Column 2, further breakdown separation. These items identify the further divisions, separation, or breakdown of items identified in column 1 that have to be measured separately. Column 3 is the unit of measure. Contains the familiar unit of measure relevant to the items in column 1 and 2, including items, number, meters, meters squared, meters cubed, or kilograms, which of course replaces tons. Column 4, category rules, provides more specific requirements or rules applicable to measured items, commonly starting with the word stating. Column 5 is extra rules. It elaborates on or extends the description of a specific item's rules and requirements usually starting with the words like including or requiring. And some extra notes Alan's got here. The list of in the columns is deemed not to be exhaustive. Each item description in the schedule will identify the work with respect to descriptive features drawn from each of the columns in the classification tables as are applicable to the item. The horizontal lines divide the classification tables and supplementary rules into zones in which different rules apply. Within the supplementary rules, everything above the horizontal line, which is below the classification heading, is applicable throughout the table. So your preambles, they're applicable throughout the whole of the measured section. Now, lastly, in the guidance, the rules is section 16 and 17. Particularly, I'd like to refer you to section 17, which is the symbols and abbreviations. You'll note in there all the ones we generally know, and of course tons is in there. We're using kilograms, so just be aware that's one of the changes. And next I'd like to move on to the guidance notes. I'm not going to read through them. I'd rather you read them and learnt the changes by using them. But just to say a few things about it, we've adopted the Australian standard generally and only made changes with their agreement that corrected errors or made measurement standards more like the Kiwis are used to and made more sense. What we have, we've covered what Kiwis should do and how they should measure these in our guidance notes. Also covered in the guidance notes are additional explanations on how to measure in New Zealand. So an Australian could come and use them within New Zealand and measure quite quickly. It will soon enough become your bread and butter, but the changes from 4202 are real and we wanted to make it a little bit easier. Additional to the guidance notes, Alan Muxler has prepared a guide for tutors to assist in the teaching of the changeover from NZS 4202 to the new ANZ SMM. This detailed guide Marilyn and I looked at and decided that it was a very useful tool, and it will very soon be published on the NZIQS website for all members to utilise if needed. It may be a good tool for teaching younger staff members or even for well-used NZS 4202 members to transfer from one system to another if they get a little lost. In addition to this, I need to refer you to AIQS measurement guides, and these are two publications you can get on the the AIQS website and will soon be available hopefully through the New Zealand Institute website. They're a good teaching guide as to how to measure. So if you had younger people, they're a way of assisting. You can talk to Marilyn about getting hold of copies of those. I don't intend to go through the guide line by line, as the notes cover sufficient information for competent users to follow their way through the new standard. We must remember that the basic principles of measuring have not changed, merely the presentation of items, and in some cases, the unit of measure and the location of the measured item may have shifted into a slightly different trade section or a separate trade section. Presentation of your document and or the logic of your measure will at times mean that items will end up in alternative trade sections to that outlined in the standard. But for the sake of common recognition, it would be my advice that generally the standard set out is followed. I'll note also that on the Institute website is the ductwork diagrams. We have taken them from 4202 and published them there. Next, I'd like to go through P and G just as a bit of an example as to how this document has changed slightly or improved, and to sort of give you an idea of the simplicity of it as well. Probably the easiest trade to follow here, in my opinion, if you have a look at this first slide, it shows that the NZS 4202 has a description there very much similar to the ANZ SMM guide, just a little more words, but basically the same thing. The second box down says, if you flip the next one, the form of contract has, shall be stated by reference. The general description to the works shall be given together with the gross floor area where applicable. Standard, preliminary and general items that may require a priceable item depending on the contract include, and then we go on to that elaboration in a minute. And in the ANZ SMM it says, the preliminary section is divided into 3 basic parts. It is very extensive and contains 8 classifications in 3 basic sections, and they're as follows. Now if we go over the page, we find NZS 4202 has 37 sections to refer to or measure. The new guide has 50, as he finds the page, 54 I think it is, no, 53. And they're set out in, if we start at the top here, section 1 to 7 includes information only items. So these are items that don't have item next to them or whatever. They probably have note or just refer, something like that in the quantity column. They include items generally which have no direct project cost, and they include things like the names of the parties, the site description, etc. You can see them listed there. Remaining classifications contain commonly recognised preliminary items that are project specific and are identified as an item and come under 2 headings. Now there are also some in here that are note, so they won't have a measurement, but you will know which ones they are. So section 8.1 general particulars, this is a section measure for the contractual conditions items as are required for the project and have a few regional appropriate items. So the contractual conditions items 1 to 24, there is working hours, rates and wages. So you go down there, until you get to item 4, you don't have a priceable item. But progress and final certificates, you'll note there, that would be a priceable item. Variations would be priceable, so they'll have item next to them, and so on through them. Then you get to over the page, section 8.2, general particulars. In this section, measurement, the site condition items as required for the project and as regionally appropriate. So section items 25 to 53, we have charts and schedules, notice boards, general and specific conditions of contracts, setting out of the works. All of these are priceable items. They're the work done on site, which are an overhead to the project. So as you can see there, they're similar, NZS 4202 and the new standard, but there are slight variances. Now, just as a little example, I thought I'd go through measuring vinyl flooring, just to give you a bit of an idea. So let us consider measuring vinyl flooring for a wet area. Where do we measure it? Well, first, we look at the table of contents. At the bottom of page 2, here we will find section 28, carpet and resilient finishes, and it refers, if you see, to page 129. So on page 129, we find the information to be included: the measurement rules, the measurement and prices, and the definitions. This is where we define our preambles, and you'll likely have these as a standard already in your office. But of course, reference is particularly made in the standard here for you to check on your specifications, etc., to make sure you include enough items. Next, we go to pages 130 to 132. Beginning at the top of page 130, the classification table asks us to define where and what the material is. So see item 5. In your current way of measuring, you'll likely use headings to define the wet and dry areas within this trade, and from there headings might define locations like floors, walls, or ceilings. The same as you will always measure, prepare your items, worded in the same way as usual, and ensure that you define specific needs, how the product is fixed and what it's fixed to. The measurement quantity is next defining part of this, and in the usual way, select the most appropriate way to measure the item, and in this case it's meters squared. The next column across asks you to define cutting, angles, etc. Note, they're not extra value. Extra values have pretty much vanished from the standard. There's a couple of extra value items under excavation, but that's about all that's left in the guide. So the last column defines the extra measurement rules, such as any specific requirements about waste, what you are fixing it to, etc. These are generally reminders to either include or separately measure items of significance. The measurement rules out to the right explain how we should physically measure the item in question. The measurement and prices column in this section is empty, as there appears to be no need to elaborate on the rules, and the last column, definitions, is there to remind us of the of doubt or if clarification is needed. D1, for instance, reminds us to tell tenderers that this flooring is in a special place. Maybe it is separate from other installations or a separate building perhaps. So, you know, if you get a glimpse of this, it's just giving us the idea to help the tenderer out. Then we move on to measure preparations of special calling, metal trims, skirtings, and under items 19 and 20, edgework such as coves or the edge of the product is covered. Again, the rules and definitions tell us how to define the items and how to measure them. There are all the keys to understand where the tenderer might find items needing pricing. You may elect to cover off items as included in the measure of another. Note this in your preambles, and as a note at the beginning of the section, or even in a description of the item that you're measuring. But simply make it clear to anyone who did not do the measure exactly where you have done it and what you mean. As you do with items now, I'm quite sure. In our guidance notes, you will see these sort of items often referred to as regional differences. Regional differences are things such as the way structural steel is measured in Auckland versus how it is measured around the rest of the country, where we measure all of the welding and all of the cutting, etc. In effect, the process of measuring hasn't changed, but the guidelines as to where and how you express items may vary a little. Yes, some items are now defined in different trade sections. If it suits you and your tenderers better, measure it where you see fit, but make sure you note the change from the ANZ SMM guide if you're going to make one. So there you go, there's a little introduction from me, and I'll hand over now to Jonathan to give you an explanation of how Caustics works with this new guide.
Thank you, Paul. We're now going to change, as Paul said, over to Jonathan, who is going to talk to you about how it is included in Caustics. It'll just take us a moment to change the screens.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Marilyn, and thanks, Paul, as well. Yeah, so hopefully everyone can see my screen at the moment. What I'll be doing today is just taking you through the ANZ SMM within practice. So if you're using Caustics, how to use it. Just a quick agenda from my side is the first thing is there might be some viewers that haven't seen Caustics before or don't know what Caustics is, so I'll just quickly touch on what the product is about. Then I'll explain what is a phraseology. I'll move on to what is a Caustics phraseology library more specifically. I'll also touch on where you can go ahead and download the ANZ SMM phraseology library. And then I'll switch over to a live demo showing you how I can import or add phraseologies into Caustics, and then also simply, I guess, how to use a phraseology library within Caustics. Finally, I'll end off with just a quick slide on what's coming soon for us, and then we can mention some questions and answers at the end. Perfect. So first of all, what is Caustics? Basically, the product is a digital estimating software with universal application, ranging from hand-drawn sketches, PDFs, 2D and 3D CAD files, and BIM models, which I guess all incorporates on-screen measurement, live link workbooks, revisioning capability, and BIM data extraction. What is a phraseology? Well, the quick definition of the website is that phraseology is a study of fixed sets of words or phrases. Another definition has mentioned that it's expressions, phrases, or manner or style of verbal expression. What is a Caustics phraseology library more specifically? Basically, it's a library of model descriptions for use in your workbook, so you can actually build up your schedule of quantities using set phrases. This is typically used when the descriptions are required to be in a prescribed format. So with the introduction of this tabular format, it's made a lot easier for us to actually follow set rules and actually create a library based on those rules, whereas previously it was a little bit more difficult to do. The phraseology library within Caustics has two file formats, the first one being a .exf file format, which is a Caustics specific format. The library that you download off the website is in that format already, so when you import it into your own Caustics system, it will be in that format. The second file format is a .csv file format, which means that if ever you want to make any adjustments or changes to that phraseology library, you'd be able to export it out in a CSV format, make the changes yourself, say in Excel, save it as a CSV, and then re-import it back into your own Caustics system. Where to download the phraseology library? Basically, you just visit our website at www.exactool.com, and you can go ahead and click on that button towards the top right hand side called resources. Once you've clicked on the resources button, it should take you to the next window over here, where you basically got different download options. You can see out on the left hand side there you've got documentation, so like our manuals and so on. You've got downloads for the actual software, and then you've got the phraseologies option. Just while I'm on this slide, I guess we also get a lot of questions of can we be updated of any changes or updates to the software? Yes, you can. You can go ahead and click on that top right-hand button, subscribe to new releases at the top there. So just coming back to this phraseologies button, once you've clicked on this phraseologies button, it'll pop up with another window where it'll ask you to put in a license key. So it won't show you this yet. It'll actually ask you to put in a license key. And if you're on your maintenance, you'd be able to just put your key in, hit the enter key, and it takes you through to this window over here, where it lists all the different types of phraseologies that we have for our clients to import into Caustics and start using. So as you can see, there's a whole list over there. There's other phraseology libraries based on other international methods of measurement. So you can see that this is not new to Exactool. We've had phraseology libraries around for quite some time already. And at the top of the list, you can see there's the new standard method of measurement, So you can just click on that option and it'll take you through to this page over here where you can click on the download now button and it'll automatically start downloading for you. Once you've downloaded that phraseology library, there are some instructions, as identified up on the screen at the moment, on how to import that into your Caustics system. In saying that though, I'll switch over to a quick live demo touching on how to actually import or add those phraseologies into Caustics, and then also how to use a phraseology library. So just give me a second while I switch over to Caustics. Perfect, so I'm in my Caustics database at the moment, or interface. For those that are completely new to Caustics who may have never seen this interface before, just quickly give a brief description on what you're looking at. Basically, the software is broken into two halves over here. So you'll see we have a dimension view tab, which is where we can go ahead and add in all our drawings and do all our measurements and takeoff. And then the other half is where we have this costing view tab, and that's where we could actually add in new workbooks for our estimates or a schedule of quantities and so on and so forth. So I'll do exactly that in a second. The first thing I want to touch on is how to actually import your phraseology library into Caustics. To do that, you'd click on the main menu button, top left-hand side over here, and then you'd go to System Administration, bottom left-hand side. You'd select the Costing tab on the pane on the left-hand side, and you'll see that there's a Phraseologies tab as well. So you can select that Phraseologies tab, and as you can see, I've got a few different phraseologies libraries in my own database, but you can ignore all the others. Out to the right-hand side, you'll see there's a few different buttons for us to utilize. The first button at the top is the Insert button. So if you want to add in a brand new phraseology library yourself, you could just click on the Insert button, give it a name, and start adding your own phrases. In saying that though, once you've downloaded the phraseology library off the website, you can come to this Import button out to the right-hand side, just click on that lower half, and you'll see that there are various different options on how to import that phraseology library in. You'll use this topmost option because the phraseology library that you download off the website isn't already in a Caustics data file format. So you can just click on the Import Caustics data option. Notice the export button. When I click on the export, you've got those two options. You can export it out to CSV, as I mentioned earlier, make your adjustments if you're required to do so, and then come back into your Caustics and re-import it in using the Import Caustics CSV option. So that's how you would bring the library into your Caustics database. Now, how to use the phraseology library. As I mentioned before, I'd like to first add in a workbook. To do that, I'll just click on the Workbooks ribbon tab all the way at the top and click on the big Add button towards the top left-hand side. And I'll just give this workbook a name of, say, SOQ for Schedule of Quantities, and then click on Insert. You'll see when I've added the workbook in, it appears in the list on the left-hand side, and we have a workbook appear out on the right-hand side. Now, some of you that may have either used Caustics or maybe not used Caustics at all, you'll see that there's a cluster of tabs out towards the left-hand side over here, and a lot of them are used quite commonly. This tab over here might be or one that you've either seen or completely new to you. If I click on that Phraseologies tab, it will list the phraseology libraries that you have in your database, and in this list you can see there's the one that we've imported in from the website. So I can actually expand that phraseology library, and it brings up all the different trades, which Paul's already touched on before. These trades meet the exact layout and order of the standard method of measurement, and now you can start using these headings to drag and drop into your workbook and build up your schedule of quantities. So for instance, if I wanted to start with my preliminaries, I can select that, and I wanted to select all of these trades, I can just hold down the Shift key to select a range, and then left click to select them all, hold down the left click, move the mouse cursor over onto the workbook, and then simply let go of the left click to drop down those headings, as you can see over there. And we've just used those phrases in this workbook. So I'll just quickly undo that, that was just an example of using a range. Say, for instance, you want to only select a few specific trades. You can also do that. So on this job, we're obviously going to need preliminaries. We may not need any demolition. We'll need the groundworks trade. We might not need piling, concrete, formwork. We may need reinforcement, and so on and so forth. So I'm just holding down that control key on the keyboard and selecting the individual trades that I want. Again, to bring them into the workbook, I simply left click and drag and drop them into the workbook like that. As many of you know, you probably the people that are using CostX, you'll know that the workbooks work on a level by level basis. For those that are brand new to CostX, that's our major difference between an Excel type spreadsheet and the CostX workbook, is that Excel have sheets running alongside each other at the bottom over here, whereas we work on a level by level basis. So let's work through a quick example on, say, for instance, preliminaries. That's our first trade item. You can go out to the F subtotal column and double click on that cell, which will drill down another level of cost. So I'm currently at level 2 of the workbook, and you can see my level 1 item of preliminaries above the workbook at the top over there. To start building up my preliminary phrases, I can now move to the library and expand my preliminaries, and I'll just explain what you're looking at once you've expanded this. Right at the top over here, we have a few rules, just helping the users explain how to use this or how to read the phrases within this library. Right at the top over here, you can see any phrase that is enclosed with 2 square brackets. Those are optional clauses. Any phrase within a singular square bracket, that's optional wording. Any phrase where you see there are 2 question marks, you need to insert a dimension. And any phrase with sort of an ellipsis or 6 full stops over there, you need to insert a description. So as an example, let's look at, say, method of measurement. I'll expand that, and there are the notes beneath that. So that would be the heading. Again, I can just select a single heading if I wanted to and drag and drop it in. However, I'll just undo that again. You can select that as well as the 2 individual notes by holding down that shift key. Now when I drag and drop those 3 phrases into the workbook and let go of the left mouse button, it drops down the heading as well as the 2 preamble notes, as you can see over there. And you'll also notice over here that the notes have already got the phrases in to refer back to the ANZ SMM 2018 document. Moving on to something like, or a few other notes, I guess, so measurement and pricing notes, reference documents, we can just simply hold down the shift key and drag and drop all of those notes in. These phrases are an exact match to what the ANZ SMM document is calling for. It doesn't mitigate the use of the document at all. In fact, you'd probably still need the document on your desk beside you, following those rules. This just helps save time. Instead of having to type out descriptions or copy and paste them from somewhere else, the descriptions are here already for you to start using and building up within your schedule of quantities. Just to quickly touch on another example, moving away from maybe preliminaries, I'll roll up a level by clicking on that arrow, which returns back up to my summary level. And let's have a look at something like concrete work. I can double click the F subtotal to drill down to the level 2 of the workbook, and then I'll move to my library and expand concrete. Again, we can start with the notes at the top, or all the preambles. So I'll expand all that and say, look, I need all of these like that, and drag and drop them in. Notice how it's also dropped down the unit as well, so that's an item for those items over there. I'll just scroll down and now start with measuring some concrete, for instance. So you can see over here we've got plain in situ concrete, and we've got reinforced in situ concrete, and so on and so forth. Again, just following the same layout, I guess, and same order as the method of measurement document. If we want to do something like blinding, we can choose that as our heading, so drag and drop that in. We can change the description now, put in the dimension as mentioned before. So let's make that N32, for instance. And you'll move down this list. To get more detail, you click on the next plus button, so to expand a further level down. So let's click on that. You can see that it calls for a location, so that's going to be on our ground floor level, so I'll drag and drop that in. If you want to apply sort of any formatting, you can do so. So I'll make that maybe underline, for instance. You can do that either using the shortcut keys or the formatting buttons at the top over there. Then you move down the list to the next plus sign, and it gives you further options, again, according to how the document is structured. So I'd say, oh, look, I need some horizontal blinding. So I'd select that and expand the lower plus sign and select both of these phrases. When I drag and drop it into the workbook, you'll see how it gives you a preview in the workbook of 2 rows, which in this case, I don't actually want. I want to be able to amalgamate those 2 phrases into 1 cell. So those that may have used Caustics before or currently using it, you might want to jot this one down. It's the Alt key on the keyboard. And when I hold down the Alt key, you can now see how it changes. It gives us a preview of only 1 row. And when I let go of the left mouse button, it joins those 2 phrases together to form 1 description. So it says horizontal blinding. You can now put in your thickness, so say 50 mil, and then move on. It's also dropped down the unit according to what the document is, the ANZ SMM document is called for. Some reinforced concrete as our next item, drag and drop that in as our heading. Also on our ground floor, might want to just underline that. And let's say we want to measure something like pad footings. You can select pad footings. I want to measure a few that are exceeding 1 meter squared on plan and placed between excavated faces. So I've got 3 phrases over there. Drag it into the workbook, hold down the Alt key to amalgamate it into 1 row, let go of the left mouse button, and it's dropped down the phrase or the description. Sorry, all 3 phrases forming 1 description together with a unit, and you can go ahead and do your measurement and plug in your quantities and your rates and so on and so forth. So that's how you would use this phraseology library. It follows the same format as the standard method of measurement, and you just keep clicking on the plus sign to get further detail on your items that you're trying to measure. So I'll just quickly switch back to the presentation and just quickly touch on what's coming soon for us. So sorry, just give me a second. I put up the wrong slide over there. I've got this one over here. What's coming soon for Exactal is Exactal's taking over sales of I2CX, which is a project management system previously known as Project Center. If you have any needs for collaboration software on a project, please contact our sales team or contact myself afterwards if you want to find out any more details on that. And then finally, I've got questions and answers, which I don't believe we'll be able to do over this webinar. But yeah, feel free to email us any questions that you may have. I'll now switch back to Marilyn. Thank you very much, Marilyn.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was a really good explanation, I think, of how you can use ANZ SMM and CostX. As Jonathan said, this is a recorded webinar, so we can't take questions on this. However, if you do have questions, my email is on the screen that's just coming up now, or you can find my contact details from our website. We're really interested to hear your feedback, particularly as you start using ANZ SMM, and if you need any further help or you've got suggestions for other training. Again, thank you very much for listening. Goodbye.